Hi everyone, this is my review of Napoleon's Eagles. Storm in the East, the battles of Borodino and Leipzig. It is a historical card game published by Compass Games. So there'll be no hexes, there'll be no counters, no step loss, no CRT, no EZOC, no plexi. I know, outrageous. And on the back, I'm joking. I bought this game on a bit of a. I was interested to sort of see what it's like, and it's very good. And in this video, I'm going to sort of talk about the things about the game that I really like about it, and there's a lot to like here. So for those of you who are watching this, going a Napoleonics card game. Come on, Matt, what are you doing? Believe you me, you will find out. Back of the box. It's complexity medium. Yes, completely agree with that. Number of players 2. Solid suitability for solitaire low. I actually think it's solitaire suitability is higher than that. It's not a solitaire game. There's no bot or anything like that. But I think it solos incredibly well. Average time to play 30 to 90 minutes. It's one of the things about it I like. You can play a quite significant battle with quite a significant number of cards in an evening comfortably. You do get a ton of cards, and we'll have a look at some of those. You get player aids, we'll have a look at those, and you get the rule and scenario book. So yeah, let's get into it. So first up, we're going to have a look at the rule book. Full colour, very nicely laid out. Graphic design is excellent. It goes through quite detailed explanation of the cards, the orientation of the cards, so whether they're card is at full strength or disrupted, and it's simply flipped over to show that it's disrupted, and its orientation shows you whether it's exhausted or not. Goes through how the core mechanics work, the command, the terrain cards, the preparation step. The game does take, for the most part, most of the battles do take a little bit of time to set up. Then we're into sort of how the battles work, and I'll sort of explain some of the core concepts behind the mechanics when we look at the actual cards on the table. But very well written. What I would say is I read through the rulebook, set up one of the smallest game, got into it, and then referred backwards and forwards between the game and the rulebook and the player aids quite a few times to sort of fully understand. And in fairness, it did take me a few games to appreciate, well, certainly to understand the mechanics and to play the game to the mechanics, and certainly start to understand the implication of those mechanics. The game has an incredible amount, in my opinion, an incredible amount of depth, and I wouldn't want people to be watching this thinking, well, it's a card game, it's a card game. It is a game with a huge amount of depth. Then we have the special abilities, and certain cards have certain abilities, as you'd expect. But yeah, incredibly well written. So only less than 12 pages of actual core mechanic rules, which means you can read through the rulebook quite briskly, get the game to the table, and then start to understand those mechanics. And I think that this is definitely a medium, what I would class as a medium complexity game. So it will take you a little while to understand those mechanics. The actual scenarios themselves, there are quite a few, so it's not a case it's just a one scenario game. And the game, the rulebook goes into detail, boasts a bit of a historic background and specific mechanics to those scenarios, and they are great from a history point of view. I really appreciate the actual mechanics, the chrome for those individual scenarios, and there are quite a few of those. So we're already up to scenario 3. So you've basically got the kind of Borodino scenarios, and then we're into the Leipzig scenarios, and there are multiple scenarios for that. Plus, you can play the Leipzig campaign as well. So I 6 scenarios I'll go out and say, I think, broadly speaking, there are in the game. You get design notes and an example of play. Highly recommend reading the example of play if you are interested in the game. And I'm not the best necessarily at explaining all the mechanics of the game or the subtleties of the mechanics or every single rule in the game. I'm not going to try and do that in this video. But the designer has some videos detailing some of the mechanics, and there's an excellent video from Mo's gaming table that details a lot of the game mechanics as well. So you should, if you're interested in the game, you should check them out after watching this review. But I did all that. I watched the videos. I went through these turn examples with the cards in front of me to help understand not just the mechanics, but the way in which to use those mechanics and what that means. But overall, I think this is an excellent rulebook. An excellent rulebook. Very well written, well edited, nicely laid out, a joy to read. And I love, and again, appreciate the historical detail and the depth of that detail and the thought behind that detail and what it means to the game. An excellent sequence of play on the back cover. This basically sits on the table constantly when I'm learning the game, when I'm playing the game, both solo and playing with other people. So this is one of the player aids that you'll get in the game. It's incredibly useful. So this details the what's classed as the playing card. It's the cards you're going to be using for combat. It's one of the most used types of card in the game. Very well laid out, very clear, very user-friendly, a great aid. The flip side of this, you get, again, the same, but for the special abilities that some of the cards have. Mostly, in fairness, they're special abilities that the leaders, I'll call them leaders, have. And again, very clear, very nice laid out. The graphic design of the whole game, in my opinion, is absolutely excellent. And very user-friendly, and very aesthetically pleasing, and aesthetically in keeping with the historical period, which I appreciate and really, really enjoyed. So these are great, and you will use them. I use them constantly through the learning of the game, and found them incredibly useful. So yeah, great job. The next thing I want to talk about is you'll use these player aids to set up your different scenarios, and each scenario will refer to which setup you're going to be using. This is the more straightforward and the quickest playing scenario. And what we have here, here we have the French and the Russians on the other side. And the key concept to the game is that your cards are presented in either wings, for the most part, wings, or into reserve. The wings will be doing the fighting. The reserve, you'll be moving cards into reserve and from the wings and then back again into the wings to do the fighting. And there's a lot more detail to it than that, but let's live with that for a second. And as you can see here, we have one card here, one wing, French have one wing, one starting card there, a few cards here in reserve. Flip the player aid round, and the Russian player has a couple of cards. One of those is a sort of and it's sort of an environment, a land card, and they've got 3 cards in their reserve as well. So if we now compare that to one of the bigger, let's compare it to one of the biggest. Here you can see this is the Leipzig campaign map. So one of the bigger scenarios in the game. The French player has multiple wings, 6 wings in total, multiple reserves, and the same for the coalition player. Plus, as we turn it around, we've also got reinforcements as well, both for the coalition, specific army reinforcements, and it has these connecting lines, and that will tell you where cards can move from and to. And as you can see, it's a lot more. It's a bigger game, and playing this is a significantly big game that will take you, a long evening or a couple of evenings to play through. So this is a game set up, and actually at a certain point in the game, and I just want to show this before we have a look at the specific cards. So you can see on my gaming table, and this is my standard war gaming table, it's full of cards. It's cards everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's cards, and different orientations, different styles of card in terms of what they're showing, gameplay cards, unit cards, information cards. There's just a mass of cards. And what I'm going to do next is we're going to have a look at some of the specific cards, and I'll talk about some of the specific mechanics that relate to those cards. And then we'll go back to this and I'll try and explain what a battle looks like and what I like about that. So here we have a French unit card, and this is one of the main types of card that you'll be using in the game. This is for second corps, and it's an infantry unit. There's the infantry piece of graphic design. It has some artillery with it, and it has a manpower +1. That means when you're doing combat, you'll get a +1 to your combat, and very nicely laid out. Got a beautiful historic illustration, and on the flip side of the card, it's the same card but disrupted. And this will be as a result predominantly of combat, but other things as well. And as you can see, its strength is depleted, it's lost its special abilities. Its strength represents the amount of damage, for want of a better expression, that it can take in the game before it is flipped over and disrupted. Then if we compare that, let's say we've got some horse, some cavalry here. Again, sticking with the French. They have a different strength. They've got the cavalry icon there, so you know what type of unit they are. Again, on the flip side is disrupted. And you get a stack of these different types of cards for the units in the game. So here we've got the old guard. Great. Here we've got, I'll move my arm across the camera, apologies for that. We've got the guard like cavalry. There we are. And each one has a sort of an art piece that will go with it. Let's pick some opposing side. There we go. Different colour representing the different nations involved. Well, that's just an example. Oh, we've got some Swedish. The Swedes. Here we go. There we go. And they're all nicely done. The one thing I would say is let's have a look at, we've got the French 8 and 9. There we go, so you can see the comparison. So different mechanic values between them. The only thing I would say, I would have liked them to have different historic period pieces of art. If possible, they share the same, if they're both the same nation and the same card type, I would say, but that's not true of all the cavalry. It's no biggie, but they're very nicely done, very nicely laid out. It's very clear, the contents of the card, very easy to read, and very easy to read, as I showed in the last shot, when you're looking at a whole table with millions. I mean, it's almost millions of cards on the table. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you get the point. Very easy to read, so which really, really helps. Now, in addition to these, here we've got our leaders. There's Napoleon. Napoleon has a different set of attributes, so leaders have different attributes. They have their special abilities, and you'll learn how to use those. They could influence the game, as you would expect, predominantly around combat and the player hand, which we'll have a look at in a second. There's Bonaparte. Here we've got Marshal Ney. There we go. Where's Blucher? Oh, I had Blucher out. Oh, I can't see him. Excellent. There we go. That's what we want. And again, very nicely done. Very, the historic pieces of art. I really appreciate those. It's just got a genuine sort of Napoleonic feel and aesthetic that obviously as a keen Napoleonic gamer I absolutely adore. And I think the cards are absolutely, for me, they're absolutely brilliant. I love them. And when I first got the game, I just sat there for the first 10 minutes just going through all the cards, just looking at the small details. So for example, tells you the general, there we go, second cavalry, the general, and just, yeah, absolutely a tremendous job on the cards. Now then, the other type of card that you're going to be using a lot in the game are these types of cards. And each side will have their own deck. So let's use the French. And during the game, for each of those wings that we talked about earlier, when you come into combat, you'll be having a hand of cards depending on what's in that wing, depending if you've got commanders present in the wing or in reserve, and a few other circumstances. You'll be pulling 4 cards or 5 cards or whatever to form your hand, and you'll be pulling them from this deck. And what these cards are used for are for checks. So for example, if you want to charge your cavalry at the opponent, you'll pull a card and you'll look at the cavalry section here for the charge. Conversely, if you're using artillery, you're looking at the artillery section of the card. Each card has a value. You'll be using this predominantly for those checks and for the colour and so forth, but predominantly for combat. And we'll have a talk about how combat works in a second. But again, very nicely, clearly laid out. In case you're wondering what these icons up here at the top mean, if you have a leader, but I can't find one now. If you have a leader present, you'll be pulling, each side will be pulling a card, and if the icons are the same, these icons are not the same, that leader may be defeated and taken out of the game, or may have another card put on top, hors de combat, and so you're going to use these extensively. I would sleeve them because they're going to be shuffled a lot through the game, and I haven't sleeved them only because I knew I'd do the video, and from experience, sleeved cards can glare horrendously bad, so I haven't sleeved them yet. I've got sleeves ready to sleeve these types of cards. Personally, I wouldn't sleeve these. You can, absolutely you can, but I would sleeve these. And these, because they get shuffled and put into hands, these unit cards are placed on the table like the scenario that I showed in the previous player aid. Then there are other types of, in fact, the other types of cards I'll probably just talk about as we look at the game back on the table. They're predominantly, they're the main types of cards, and you do get stacks and stacks of them. So, for example, I haven't counted how many French types of units there are, but there's a very good selection, and they're all done to this sort of level of quality, which is excellent. I think the cards are excellent, and I have played now all the different battles. I played the campaign, I played the game solo and with other players, and have found the cards have worn incredibly well. No signs of wear on them whatsoever. A very high physical production value, in my opinion. So before we talk a bit about how combat works, I just want to go back to explaining how the wings and the reserve work, because it's a core part of understanding this mass of cards. And what I've done here is I've taken half the cards away, just so it helps me focus in on trying to explain this part of the game. And it is a core part of the game. What we have here, now conveniently, this table that I'm using has actually 4 panels to it. And what I have, very clever, if I do say so myself, is set up the 4 parts of the game on each panel. So, what do I mean by that? Here we have, at the bottom panel here, just on camera, we've got the French reserve. So these are units in the reserve of the battle. They're not taking part in the battle at the moment. Broadly speaking, they are in the reserve. And conveniently, you do get some cards that label all your reserves. So if you don't have a conveniently segmented table like I do, it doesn't matter. You get cards to represent that. So that's our South Reserve. Then, for the French, they have 2 wings. wing A and wing B. They are two separate wings. There are, at times in the game, I may be able to move some cards from here into my reserve, and there are times where I certainly would want to be doing that, and I can move my cards from my reserve into my wings. Depending on the battle, I don't think there are any times where you can move cards from one wing to another. You move them to the reserve, and the next turn you move them reserve to the wing. It's a core concept. For the coalition, for the opposing side, over there, them lot over there, again, this panel here for their two wings, and this back panel there for their reserve. And again, you get cards to show you the difference between the wings and the reserve. It is one of the things that took me when I was reading the rules. I was like, wings, reserve, wings and reserve in hex games mean different things. So it took me a little time to adjust to the terminology used in this game, but it's pretty straightforward when you get your head around it. The wings will do the fighting. That's good. The wings will be retreating into the reserve. That's bad when that happens. The wings will be inflicting damage on the opposing wings. That's good for you, bad for your opponent. The wings, once they've defeated or these cards are no longer there and they will be moved out as a result of retreating, etc., the wings will then be able to inflict damage on the reserves. That's very good for you, very bad for your opponent. And that's just to give you some sort of snapshot of what all these cards mean on the table. Once you're familiar with the game, and as you can see here, the cards on the table are predominantly unit cards, leaders. There, all these are units. They're just different types of units. They're infantry units or cavalry units or artillery units. There are sort of location cards, for example here, and some of the scenarios, they will be tied into the victory conditions. Each scenario will have its own victory conditions, but they're predominantly units for the vast majority, and leaders. And then you have almost player aid cards, I'd call them, to help remind you of what all these things are. And incredibly useful they are too. And as you can see, the game looks great. The one thing I would say is the physical space you need to play the game is not inconsiderable. This table that I'm filming here, I can't actually physically move my camera any further away from it and it's still being shot. But it's the table that I use for all of my single map war games. So if I'm playing a single map war game, Hex and Cow war game, I'll be using this table, and they will, normally I'll have a bit of space around that so it's not too cramped. But for this game, I've used the whole table, the whole thing. So you do need, I think this table is roughly 6 foot by nearly 3 foot, for example. You will need the whole table to play certainly some of the bigger scenarios. So in this example, I'm just going to talk about how combat works at a very high level. I'm not going to go into every single detail of the mechanics because there are quite a few. And like I said, there are other videos on YouTube where they do that way better than I possibly could. But I'll illustrate the main point. The player will have a number of these types of cards in their hand. They draw those based on if there are leaders present in those wings or in the reserve, and if there are combined arms. But let's say, for the sake of argument, for the most case, especially when you're learning, you'll be pulling four cards either side. One side will be deemed as the attacker or the first player. And if you want to perform an attack, and why would you not, you will pick a card from your hand. It will have a value. This value here, for example, is a massive 25. That's, I think, the highest value in the whole game. So 25. The opposing player will need to pick from their hand the same colour cards to equal or better that number. So, for example, let's say, let me pick a few cards here. 4 cards for the opposing player. Let's say the best card they've got is a 4. Well, the 4 doesn't better or equal the 25. The French have won that battle and they will inflict the difference in damage on the opposing player. The opposing player, to take that damage, will be flipping their cards over to be disrupted. They will be exhausting them, and they will be removing them from the wing, and they are out of the game. The wing will then be open, have no cards in it, and the French player will then be able to jolly well go and attack their reserves. And the opposing player doesn't want that, because when their reserves are inflicted damage against, then they don't have command, they take demoralization, and eventually you'll win the game. That's it. That's it in like a 60-second nutshell. However, there's a lot more detail to it than that, because you have cavalry, and cavalry can charge. The French declare an attack. The opposing player can go, well, I think, let's say the French put down an 8, a red 8. The opposing player can think, well, I think I can match that with the cards in my hand, and they put down a 4, still not matched. Then the French player can go, well, I'm going to charge you with my cavalry, and I'm going to pull a card for that because it's 1 cavalry, and I get, let's say I get a 4, that makes now a 12. The opposing player, well, I'll charge you with my cavalry, and they're going to pull a card, etc. And so it goes on and on until you run out of cards, and one side's the winner and one side's the loser. If one side loses, then the other side then can attack, and so forth, until that battle runs out of cards. It doesn't take very long. Then you move on to the next wing, do that battle, the next wing, and so forth, and so it goes. It actually plays when you get your head around the combat, and the combat, I would say, is probably the bit that takes the most getting your head around. It actually plays really fast and is a lot of fun. And you can play it solo. I've played it solo quite well, just picking the best cards for each side, as I think they would if I was playing it 2-player, and had a lot of fun in doing so. So in conclusion, I love the physical components. The cards themselves are beautifully done. You even get turn cards. So as you're going through the different turns of the scenarios, you use a different card for the turn. Beautifully done. The rulebook, incredibly well laid out, easy to read. From a production point of view, I think the game is absolutely excellent. And when I bought the game, in fairness, I bought the game a little bit on a whim. It's very rare I will buy a war game or historical game that's not hex or counter or not area based or whatever. But there was something about the game that I found quite intriguing as an idea, and I'm really pleased that I did, because the physical components are brilliant. I love the mechanics, and I know I glossed through the combat mechanics. Please do check out those tutorial videos that I explained, I talked about. They do a way better job than I ever could have explained the combat. But the way the combat works, it's really fluid. There is a bluffing, or when you're playing with the players, you don't know what cards they've got. You do lose some of that when you're playing it solo. But I still do think it solos really, really, really nicely. And I've played all the scenarios solo and thoroughly enjoyed every single one of them. I love the historical attention to detail. And even though it's not a simulation by any stretch of the imagination and an abstraction of history, it's still got a really rich Napoleonic historic feel and flavour. And I really, really appreciate that. And it feels like it's been crafted and designed and produced by someone who absolutely loves that historic period. And that comes through in the game and the mechanics. But also, I think what's interesting about the game, and what I really liked about the game, was that it's so different. It's so different than every other game I've got on my shelf. I've got stacks and stacks of hex and counter, put the map under the plexiglass type games, and I read the rule books, and I love them all. I read the rule books, and I'm looking for how they do the EZOC and how they do the CRTs and how they do the command structure. But with this game, it's so different, but yet so equally rich in this sort of Napoleonic theme. Not necessarily the simulation, but the theme. And for that, I absolutely loved it. I found all the mechanics, I should say, the combat is the one that's going to take the longest to get your head around. And it's partly because of the fact that it's so different to anything else I've ever played, certainly, that it's not like you can lean into something you already know. You know, you can when you're looking at a hex and counter war game, you can kind of go, oh, okay, the CRT works this way. Oh, okay, the movement works a little bit different, or the command structure works. It works the same as this other game that I've played and know about. But with this game, that point of reference isn't there. And that, for me, was an enjoyable challenge, but did take me a little while to get my head around. And I had to play quite a few games to sort of get to understand it. And I would even say that even now, having played all the different scenarios, I still feel there's a depth of play that I haven't quite unlocked yet that gives that game that depth and long-term play that I really, 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 really like. And that's really obvious to me when I'm playing. And I'm playing the game thinking, I could do a lot better here than I am doing. I need to learn. I need to understand the intricacies of some of the detail and some of the strategies that you can play. And it's obvious that this game has that. Even though I'm looking at cards, my mind isn't seeing the cards. My mind is seeing this battlefield. My mind is seeing these units in reserve, the commanders being in reserve, the commanders coming up into the wings and leading from the front more, and the impact that's having on the battle. And I'm seeing the sides retreat and push into each other. I'm seeing, some of the formations stumble. I'm seeing some of the formations move forward. I'm seeing all this play out. But when I'm seeing it, instead of hex and counters, I'm seeing it with cards. And for that, I absolutely love the game. It is a explosion of Napoleonic card goodness, and I love it. It's probably been one of my biggest, most pleasant surprises from recent time, of a game that I knew nothing about, had no expectations for, didn't really know what I was getting into, but knew that I love the theme. It's a theme that I played a lot of games with, but I was intrigued by, and I have nothing but good things to say about it, because I feel like it's one of those games you come across and go. I can remember the first time I played it, I was playing, just learning it solo. I was like, this is utterly, utterly brilliant, because it's so different and yet so engaging. It makes you think so much, and it feels so Napoleonic, but without the simulation side. And so therefore it has its place. I would say, I can imagine if you've got another Napoleonic friend, or a friend who's interested in Napoleonic history, brilliant. You can play battles in the evening, and I guarantee you will enjoy it and you will have fun. Do not expect a simulation. It is not that. It's not pretending to be that. But it still has that rich Napoleonic flavour. Equally, if you're playing games solo, it's not solitaire. It's not like a bot, or you're playing against a game. But I absolutely loved it, play it solo. So yeah, high recommendation for me. It is a absolutely splendid Napoleonic game, and I'm very much looking forward to. I believe there's another one coming out. I'm looking forward to that incredibly. So yeah, high recommendation. And thanks for watching. I hope that was interesting. Please do check out the other videos, especially the videos from the designer. They're really good. They help sort of cement some of that understanding when you're reading through the rule book. And the video from Mo's gaming table as well. Absolutely excellent. So yeah, great stuff. And thanks again. Thank you.